Welcome to the Starry-eyed Effect. I'm Steph.
And I'm Jen. On this podcast, we'll be chatting about all things Williams syndrome.
The ups and downs, and what it's like living with Williams syndrome.
We're excited to share our community with you. Thanks for being here. So I was going to be alone today because our dear friend Steph, she's not feeling so well. And so that's a bummer because she's my wing lady, or I'm her wing lady. I don't know which way we're going to go. But thankfully Joel has stepped in, producer Joel, and he's here today. Hi, Joel.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, obviously, yeah, Steph is feeling a bit under the weather, so we're hoping that she gets better soon and can join us. So I stepped in. Unfortunately, dear listener and viewer, you have to put up with me today. But you get Jen, and that's always great.
And it's good for people to know who you are. Why don't you tell everybody who you are? Who are you?
Who am I? It's a question I wrestle with every day. I am, I live in Minnesota with my family. I have a son, who will be turning 12 in just a couple weeks, with Williams syndrome. And, my other job was as a professional actor, and then, which was great. But then when the pandemic hit, all my acting work went away. And so I really just sort of as a way to, I was interested in how I could be a better advocate and how I could, help Bennett and others like him. And I had been starting to think about like what's out there when Bennett becomes an adult. So I had been starting to increase my knowledge and my aptitude of advocacy, trying to get better and trying to learn. But yeah, I work as the director of family support for the WSA, and I get to talk to and meet and help families from all over the country. So it has been difficult, but it has been so unbelievably wonderful, getting to be part of the WSA and moving forward into this next chapter of whatever the WSA where we can take it.
So I love that you are on the WSA though, because, and you probably hear this a lot, there's not a lot of dudes doing the advocacy work. It's usually moms. And so I appreciate like a dude voice. Have you heard that from other families?
A little. I think it's good. It's also challenging. Because it is traditionally a feminine space, advocacy. I try to be mindful of what my energy and what my presence does when I am invited, or when I am, by nature of my job, I have to step into that space.
Well, before we get into our conversation with Kristen, you mentioned Bennett's 12. Do you want to just give him a little plug before we transition?
Ben, we all think our kid's the best. My kid actually is, though. No, Bennett's awesome. He's 12. He's big into the band Toto right now. Which, my prog rock loving self, I did not push that on him. He discovered it, and I am loving, just like, oh yeah, no, you want to listen to Toto? Great, cool, bring it on.
Well, we should probably get into it. We started out and we were like, what are we going to talk about for 10 minutes? And then we were like, well, this will probably take like 40 minutes. And yep. I think it did.
Yeah, we could sit and chat for hours about very little, because that's just who we are. But our guest, we have an amazing guest.
We do. We have an amazing guest. So this week, I don't know if you know this, Joel. it's Disability Book Week. So we're actually recording this episode in Disability Book Week, which is April 23rd to 29th. And Disability Book Week is all about highlighting books that have characters with disabilities, or books that are written by people with disabilities. And so, like, for me, it's a really important time in our community, because it's a way to highlight disability in a way that everybody has access to. For the most part, people have libraries in their schools. They can listen to books on audio. And so it was a fun idea that Joel and I had of bringing on an author who just recently wrote a book about Williams syndrome. So her name is Kristen Cagadas, and Kristen has a daughter, Layla, who is 4.5 years old. She also is the mom to another kiddo, a young little boy. And they are, in addition to being authors of a book about Williams syndrome, in a journey to relocate from Washington, D.C. to Wisconsin. And so today in our conversation, we're going to talk about that and the impact it's had on their family, as well as what they are doing in the community with Elsie with a Great Smile.
Elsie with the Great Smile. I'm sorry, I cut you off on at the end part. Elsie with the Great Smile, a first look at Williams syndrome. You can find out more about that book and order copies of that book at purejoymama.com, purejoymama.com. That is Kristen's website. There's also, there's also an opportunity, if you know of a family, or if you know of a library that that would benefit from having this book in it, school districts, things like that, you can purchase books from the website, and Kristen will send them where you need them to go. She gives a big chunk of money of that back to the Williams Syndrome Association. Same with they have, speaking of Elsie with the Great Smile, she has our good friend Jessica at Outshine Labels. They have the Great Smile line of clothing and stuff, and money from those purchases goes back to the WSA as well.
It was super awesome to have her. And I was thinking, which we didn't say with Kristen before, but we talked about our kids and their starry eyes, and like, our kids also have great smiles.
Yeah, they do. That frankly, they share them a lot, because they I think, especially as our kids get older, and I'd be curious. We didn't ask this. I'd be curious to say, with Layla being 4.5 now, she has probably a greater awareness of herself, and I wonder if she's noticed, like when Layla's out and about and in public, how she uses her smile and uses her energy to affect where she's at. Because I know Ben, he loves nothing more than to be in a room and just share his smile and share his energy with everybody, and try to brighten everyone's day. So yeah, and I don't know if does Stella do that? Does she like to bring her kick butt smile into a room?
She definitely knows how to turn it on. Like, she could be in the worst mood, and then like something, intrigues her, and then it's like that bright personality just comes out. And I'm like, well, look at you. Okay. So Kristen, if you are listening to this, maybe you could tell us if Layla has been using her smile, and if that was some inspiration behind the book.
Maybe that's a good place to start. Is I've never had to do a big cross country move with my family. I mean, not since my son was born. Mm-hmm. We did move from the city to to the burbs, just because we felt we knew the special education team in this area better, because my mother-in-law was a teacher in the area for 30 some years, so she knows everybody. So like what kinds of What kinds of things that like did you and your husband and your everybody talk about, like, you know, and when you're making plans to come back near your larger family, um can you just share a little bit about like what kinds of thoughts and everything that you had, that you guys talked about in the special considerations when you are taking into consideration Layla and her future?
Yeah, so there's so many different components I feel that go into that. Um, we have been a military family and we're 10 years in, and my husband, John, and I have always kind of talked, well, what's going to be the best, you know, option for our family, looking down the road, looking at Layla's future. And for us, we always talk about stability, whether it's financial stability, the insurance, like job stability. And that's always kind of been the North Star for us, is just making sure, that as we move forward, stability. And that script for us really flipped truthfully at the Williams Syndrome Convention this past year. And I remember we had gone to one of the seminars and we were sitting at a table, having a cup of coffee. And we were like, well, what if stability, the way we've looked at it, is more about being close to family and being in a community and being rooted in a spot where everyone gets to know Layla. It's not, oh, there's that girl, she has a disability, I see her on, time to time in the city. But it's, oh, that's Layla Cagadas, and that's her mom, Kristen, and her brother, Landon, and her dad, John. And so for us, we were like, stability, I think, we need to look at it from that family, that community lens, where we're not uprooting every few years. And so we decided to separate and get out of the military and move back to Wisconsin. And so my husband will officially be done in the military in August. And we've had a few moves. And as you all know, the amount of specialists and the therapists and, I mean, the IEP in the school district, there's just so much that comes with it. And every time we've done 2 moves with Layla. And so it's a lot, just reestablishing that whole healthcare system and that team. And we didn't want to keep doing that every few years. And so that was also kind of a big motivator. So now that we're in Wisconsin, I think honestly, I've probably set up close to 12 different specialist appointments and therapies, and we're trying to like knock them all out and meet people and get just kind of in the groove with that. But all of those things, I think, really impacted us not wanting to move anymore, and with getting us back home. And those are all the big motivators.
Yeah.
That's a big life change. Especially, was your husband like at a point where he could like retire from the military or like get out with, I don't know, military speak. So I just know that there's like a time where people are like, I'm out. It's like teachers. So was he that point, or was it like, I have to break up with you? And has it been like easy or painful?
And did he have to go, it's not you.
You would say
it's me.
That's exactly, yes. So we were not at the point where he could retire. So you can retire at 20 years. And we were right at that half point. So it's a point when you decide you either stay in and do the full 20 or you get out. There's no point in doing 15 and getting out. You might as well finish it up. And so we were at that critical point where it was either, all right, we're in it for the long haul, or we get out and we're done. So it was a very, very hard decision, because there's a lot of challenges with being in the military, a lot, but there's also a lot of benefits too. And especially look at that healthcare insurance and coverage piece. And, as you know, with our kids, like that's a huge benefit. But the hours that we've put into discussing and all of the weighing the different elements that come into this decision, we are excited and a little nervous, but feel like we've made the best decision for our family and for Layla's future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and and I can only assume, being being in the military is you're not just, it's not a job. It is a big part of a person's identity. And not just for the person who is serving, but for the whole family. So that, yeah, I can only imagine that was a tough, tricky discussion, and obviously we thank your husband and you and your family for your
Thank
service.
you.
So it's but I love what I love what you said about like changing what the idea of what does stability mean. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's really huge, and um, yeah, I think that's a big component of growing up as parents. And it's adulting, and
Mm-hmm.
adulting isn't fun. At least I, sometimes, but
Yeah, when Stella was diagnosed at 5, and you probably already know this, Kristen, we lived in a town that's like one town over from where we are now, but it was a smaller school district. And the minute that she got diagnosed, or we thought that she had Williams syndrome, my first thought was like, I need to get her into a bigger district. I need to get her in a place where she's part of a community, right? Where we like live on a street and everybody knows her name and everybody in the town knows who she is, and that, we are okay that people know that she has Williams syndrome. So like, we want them to know she has Williams syndrome. We want them to know how to interact with her as a person as a disability. We want them to know our role in that for her as a family. And we're okay. So Stella's in 6th grade, so we're like 6-ish, 7 years into a diagnosis, and it's still really important to us. I mean, like, I do get, because I'm from this area, and so I'm always like, oh, cool, I've never left. But as Stella gets older, I'm seeing that it's so important for her to have that stability in the sense that you shared. I can't imagine her starting over somewhere else. And like, I really find it hard as I like think forward to think like, geez, what if we did move to Arizona where you're at right now? Because I love it there and it's warm, like, how would we possibly like go through the process of integrating her into a community as an adult? I know it's possible, and I know there's families out there that do it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like in my brain, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such an effort. So you did have to think really strategically about this, because like, it's not a quick decision. It's like we're planning so many years out for the success of our kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I agree. Like everything you said is exactly what we're hoping for, where you said people know her name on the street, and same, we're so open with Layla's diagnosis as well. And I think for us, it's almost like if we put it out there, then it's like not a big deal, and that's kind of the experience that we found. And so I think as we integrate in this community, in our new community, and we get to know people and people get to know us, we're excited to share our story and share more about what makes Layla Layla.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, we started a little backwards. So can you share with us just briefly? So Layla is 4, 4.5, because I'm sure she would want us to know she's almost 4.5. Briefly, when did you guys get diagnosed? And let's close that loop of how we got to the first part of our combo.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kristen. That's what happens when you have like the first time co-host on here. I mess up the timeline. I screw up Jen's process. That's the whole thing.
There's no timeline. There's no timeline. The wheels are not on the bus over here.
I feel that this morning. So Layla was diagnosed when she was 3 months old. So I had a typical pregnancy, fairly typical delivery for all intents and purposes. She spent a couple of days in the NICU for low blood sugar, but there wasn't really anything on our radar at that point. And then there were kind of little like Easter eggs, leading up to her diagnosis. So they had heard a heart murmur. We went to the cardiologist. He said, super typical for kids to have a heart murmur, come back in 3 months. The following week, I found a hernia on her. And so we did the hernia surgery. And while she was under for that surgery, again, not knowing that she had Williams syndrome, they came to tell us, they asked if they could do another echo while she was sedated. And at that point, they noticed that, her heart was a little more severe than what they had originally thought. And the cardiologist recommended, come back next week, let's talk about it. And they knew then, I think, that she had Williams syndrome, but it wasn't on our radar at that point. But when we went into the next appointment, they brought it up and recommended she get tested. And so then that's how we got our diagnosis. So we officially received it when she was, actually, I take that back. She was 2 months old when she got the diagnosis.
And she doesn't have any significant heart problems?
No. So we have been very lucky and we're extremely grateful. But as she's gotten older, a lot of those initial heart concerns have resolved, and we're just kind of in a monitor, like kind of watch mode. But I remember the cardiologist said she will have open heart surgery before she's a year. And so we got a second opinion from a cardiologist in Boston. And I remember him saying to me, oh, it's not if your daughter's going to get heart surgery, it's when. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of, I think that just was a huge, concern for us that first year. And every time we went in, they're like, okay, we don't need to do anything now. Next appointment, don't need to do anything now. And then they kind of started saying, well, it actually looks like it might be getting a little better. Or things might be growing and a little bit more. And so we're here, 4.5 years later, and we have not had any heart surgery or anything. And her cardiologist at one of the more recent appointments said, if I didn't know her history, I wouldn't know why you were coming in here. And so, yeah, we're very, very lucky and grateful for that.
Yeah. So how describe Layla today?
Layla is a Spitfire. She has a huge personality. She's very loving, social, very determined. And when she makes up her mind about something, that's what Layla wants to do. She's funny, and it just seems like she's picking up new things every day. Layla started talking around November, December, so just before she turned 4. Yep. And so it's like every day I feel like she's kind of picking up something new. She started humming like the Star Wars theme song, and I'm not like, I know little to next to nothing about Star Wars, but like these little things that are just Layla. But she's just an absolute joy.
That's fantastic. How so? And her brother, is it a little brother, older brother?
Little brother. So Landon, they're 22 months apart.
Okay.
So it's been a very, very busy 2.5 years. Yeah. Just with having them both, it's super fun, and just seeing, the dynamic. Even though he's younger, he's already starting kind of to adopt a little bit of a big brother role. Like he, will make sure she's drinking her water. He'll make sure she's like staying with the family, and he'll go grab her and, pull her by the hand and, help her do things. And it's not anything that we've it's just naturally kind of how their relationship is developing. But he's younger.
If it's all right, could I ask the both of you, because Bennett's our only child, after our birth story was very intense and dramatic and stuff, and it I a couple years after, when my son was 1.5, 2 years old, I kind of got baby crazy again and wanted to have another one. And so my wife and I talked about it, and it was such a excuse me, a traumatic experience for her that ultimately, we talked about it, and having another kid was just not going to be the best thing for us. Um, could the two of you like talk a little bit about what it was, you know, the thought of having another child after having a child with Williams syndrome or any sort of disability. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about those feelings, those fears, those joys? I'd just be curious if you guys would be willing to, if you both would be willing to share.
Yeah. So, okay, sorry. I think, going into it, for us, it was a big decision. We wanted to have another child, but it is, honestly, it's a bit scary because it wasn't that we were concerned we'd have another child with Williams syndrome, but there are so many different, complications, health concerns, just different things that I don't know how many different like syndromes and different things exist out there. And so for us, it was a concern. Well, what if we have a child that also has another child that has complex health needs and learning challenges and developmental delays? Can we, do this for two individuals? Like, is this something that that we can do? And so it was just, as I'm sure, Jen, you feel this way too, but we just kind of honestly prayed and just hoped then that, we'd have a child that, was healthy, and that, we just kind of trusted that this, was in the plan, and that, just having faith that everything was going to work out the way that it was supposed to.
But did you always have, like, after Layla's diagnosis, were you like, yes, we're having a child, but you just were wrestling through that? Or was it like really a tough decision that you wrestled with?
We knew that we were going to have another. So, we have concerns that we talked through, but I think we were always pretty, firm on knowing that we wanted to have another child.
Yeah.
How about you, Jen?
So, well, wheels are off the bus over here. As I mentioned, so Stella wasn't diagnosed until she was 5. So by the time she was diagnosed with Williams syndrome, I already had another kiddo. But what's interesting is, so between Stella and her sister, I had an ectopic pregnancy. And so, I lost a child essentially through that process. And then after Stella was diagnosed, we had Stella and her sister Greer. Then I also had another pregnancy that I miscarried on. And so after I was like, okay, I'm 50% here successful, right? And one of my kids that I actually have has a disability. So it was definitely a point, after we had tried a few times and been unsuccessful, I was like, okay, this is God's way of telling me that I'm good. What's interesting now is that, which I've always had in my heart, I've always felt like I wanted to have more kids, but I obviously just gave up on the fact of actually having them. So then I thought, well, I will adopt a kiddo, which I say that. And then my husband's like, no, F no, right? He is so against it. And then I was like, well, we'll just have another kid through adoption. And then recently, you guys, on my heart, I'm like, I would love to adopt a kid with a disability, right? Like Williams syndrome or Down syndrome. And my husband thinks I am bananas. He thinks that it is yeah, he might divorce me if I ever bring somebody home. But I'm like, one day somebody's going to show up here and we're going to just bring them in. Because I love the idea of having more family. So now and I know that's a really weird way to answer your question. My thought now is I don't want my daughter Greer to be the only one who is has the responsibility of taking care of Stella, or, looking after her as she becomes an adult. And so I just have, which again, if I have another child that comes through, with a disability, it's like that probably makes it more complicated, but I don't know. Like we did have a listener who actually asked this question of, they have a child with Williams syndrome, they're contemplating having another child, what advice would you give them? And I'm like, man, I don't have any advice, because clearly it's, so many feelings that I have over here. But it's good to hear you say, which is what I heard you say, like in your gut, you knew that you're going to have another child. You just had to go through the processing of, if we have a child with a disability, what does that look like? What does it possibly look like having two kiddos with disabilities? Do you think you'll have more, or now that you have a second, are you like, I'm good?
And please remember, and this is something I tell all of my friends, you're gonna be outnumbered if you have another one.
So I'm one of 4 kids. So I just love my husband's dad is one of 11. So I mean, family, we love family. It's just, we love the community, and just I don't know. It's just, again, growing up as one of 4, I always had somebody to hang out with. I always and now that we're older, we all are in different spots of our life, but we're all super close. And so it's just, I love that. So, I mean, it's definitely something we've thought about. It's not anything that we're, not now, but hopefully, in the future, if we're lucky. So yeah, I think.
And really,
maybe.
what else is there to do in Wisconsin?
Besides eat cheese, look at cows, have kids, yeah.
Drink beer, go to the lake. What else? I don't know.
Yeah, well, like I was saying before we started recording, I took a trip over to Oshkosh, and of course made sure to stop at a particular cheese stand, and pick up some smoked Gouda and smoked mozzarella, and also, and then had to get a couple cases of spotted cow.
Spotted cow, yep. We had to pick some up before we even got home. We drove, and I have a picture right as we crossed into the Wisconsin border. We went to a gas station, and John's standing outside with a spotted cow, and I sent it to the family saying, "We've arrived officially. This is
it is official."
It's official, yes.
So could you share a little bit about how Elsie with the Great Smile, how where that came from in your journey? There it is. Yep, where it came in your journey with Layla, how that how that came about.
Yeah, so shortly after a couple months after, we learned I was pregnant with Landon, I started thinking about, well, how am I going to teach Landon about Williams syndrome, and how am I, for that matter, going to teach Layla about Williams syndrome? And I've always loved, and I think, the majority of people do as well, but children's books, and just reading. And I was like, oh man, I wish that I had something a book on the shelf that I could just read to them. And it was just kind of a part of, one of the books that we read. And as I got a little bit older, I would say, well, Layla's a lot like this character in this book, and kind of introduce it to them that way. And I did not set out to write a book initially. I had written this little kind of almost like a poem, that kind of talked about, a lot of it is kind of the bones of what became Elsie with the Great Smile. And I remember I shared it with, my husband, and he was like, actually, this is, might be helpful, for a couple other families if you wanted to share it. And so then I shared it with a few of my mom friends that have kiddos with Williams syndrome. And so it kind of grew from there. And the woman that edited the book, she was the former editor of Disney Publishing Worldwide. And so I went to her and I said, hey, this is what I wrote. And she kind of helped me. A lot of it is completely different from what it originally started as, but really worked on, a story and what did I want people to get out of that, and how can we convey that through, these words? And then I found an illustrator that I loved. She is from Poland, and she's from Russia, currently lives in Poland. And I loved her artwork. And it was important to me that whoever illustrated this, and I should say I'm like jumping ahead and kind of a little bit all over, but after that initial point, I was like, well, maybe this would be a good book, but I know nothing about actually making a book and having this like actually be something that I can share with people. So then that's kind of, I did a big learning curve. But back to the illustrator, it was important that the artist was able to capture kind of the essence of Williams syndrome, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't caricature like, or it wasn't, I just wanted it to be like really representative of, what Williams syndrome is. And time a little bit about the name. So my daughter's name is Layla, but I did not want this book to be about Layla. Like, it's about Williams syndrome as a whole. And so I didn't want to name, it Layla with a Great Smile. There is a shout out to her. Her initials are LC for Layla Cagadas. So that's how the name LC was chosen.
Nice. See, that's what
Yeah.
that's some smart thinking there. It's really great. And any have you, now that you know the process, has there been any thought to sort of a follow-up as Layla gets older here, and exploring Williams syndrome and Elsie's story as she gets older here? Like maybe exploring some teen fiction?
So it's not currently on my radar, but I never say never to anything. So who knows? I don't have a definitive answer, but
in all your spare time with kids and moving and changing life directions and stuff.
Your entire life.
Just a couple things going on.
Quick squeeze that in. I think we'd all appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, if there was, if there was definite like interest and stuff, down the road, like again, never say never.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, obviously we have a copy of the book. So for people who are watching on YouTube, I showed you the book, and I agree with you. I love the illustrations. There's so many, as a parent, as I look through it, there's just things that like make my heart smile, right? Like the DNA, the little shots, the brain, the heart, the X and Y chromosomes. I think it's very beautifully done. And I do have like a lot of things hidden in there that if you have a kid with Williams syndrome, you see them and you're like, oh yes, that totally resonates with us. Joel, you don't know this, but I think Kristen, you do. I got the book and Stella and I read it together. And then after, I took a video of her talking about it, and representation is so important. So Stella's 12. And so for the first, when did this come out? She would have been 11. First 11 years of her life, really, there wasn't any representation of her or her disability in a book. And so like just last year, there's 2 books that came out that were geared towards Williams syndrome, yours being one of them. And like, it was so awesome to see her be like, that's like me, right? Like Elsie doesn't like loud noises and I don't either. And Elsie cries at, certain things and so do I. It's hard for me to tie my shoes. So I really think that how you've put this together has been thoughtful of our community and the things that like overarchingly that impact us as, having Williams syndrome in our lives, and especially foremost for the people who have Williams syndrome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And we can yeah.
So see you. Stella was like, I play all these instruments. And I'm like,
Yeah, that's how Ben was too. It's like, oh,
That's amazing.
I have all of those except a saxophone, Dad. I'm like, step off.
Where's my saxophone?
Yeah, he's like, because he's been wanting a saxophone for forever for his like collection of instruments, and it's like, dude, saxophones are so expensive. I'm not gonna get you one if you don't know how to play it. And he's like, but Dad, I have to have it for my collection.
There's a P. Do you know about the P saxophone or whatever? Do you know? Okay.
Well, I tried to show him that, and he's like, yeah, no.
That doesn't cut it.
Yeah, it's not. we did the P-bone, the trombone. We got that, and it's awesome. And he is so good. He like took to the trombone like a fish to water, and I'm like, this is awesome. And then he was like, yeah, but what I really want to do is, and I'm like, okay.
Yep.
So we have
Hey Joel, can I mention for people that are listening, P-bone is like a style of instrument, right? Where instead of being made out of metal, it's like plastic, right? It's like a hard plastic. And they're actually cheaper than regular instruments, although we buy a lot of our instruments used. So I just want to make sure everybody knows, like, if your kid needs a lot of instruments in their life, which, as we were saying, ours do, there's a lot of great options out there to procure instruments on the cheap.
Yeah.
That's so good to know.
Yeah.
Feeling we'll be
you'll need that
on this road and not too long.
And so for you just released a couple coloring like some sheets that that people can color on, and it can be used as an education tool. You released those for Williams Syndrome Awareness Month here. We will of course put that link when we post the show on the Starry-eyed Effect Facebook page and in other places. Yeah, it's this was just really wonderful to get a chance to talk with you, Kristen. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I want to share, I think, one of my favorite pieces that has come out of this is, so often I feel like, we've got a phenomenal community, but, in your day-to-day life, you don't often see, you're probably not going to just run into someone with Williams syndrome on the street. It is a rare thing. And as of right now, that I know of, the book is in 10 countries. And the only state I haven't shipped to directly is North Dakota. So that one's the only state I haven't shipped to directly. But I've been able to connect with parents that have just reached out all over the world. And it's just cool. Like, cause we're so lucky to have the association that we have here and the resources and the tools. And so it's been neat that I've been able to kind of be a part of creating that resource for other families in other countries that don't necessarily have what we're lucky enough to have with the WSA.
Yeah.
I think so too. And I think that we as a collective, right, if we all leverage our strengths, like there's so much impact that we can make, not only in Williams syndrome community, but in the disability community as a whole. This week is Disability Book Week. I'm sure you already know that, Kristen, but having this book in schools just helps familiarize people with Williams syndrome. And I wish that we had it sooner so that I could have put it in Stellism Elementary School, but it's there now, and that's what's important, that people know our kids and that we create that community that we're yearning for, that you are moving across the country for.
Thank you. Well, I'm so grateful to you all for inviting me on here and just getting the chance to talk and connect. I'm really grateful.
You've been listening to the Starry-eyed Effect, presented by the Williams Syndrome Association. The show is hosted by Jennifer Keaton and Stephanie Karen, and produced by me, Joel Lispin. Theme song by Tommy Barbarella and Mariella Elm. Got a question for Steph and Jen? Email us at podcast@williams-syndrome.org. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and maybe it will get featured on a future episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to The Starry-eyed Effect wherever you get your podcast delights.